Hello, everybody. Welcome to the British Rowing Diversity and Inclusion webinar. Tonight, we're going to go through the data from the British Rowing Diversity and Inclusion research that happened earlier in the year. My name is Ash Wyatt. I'm one of the key support managers at British Rowing, and I'm also a member of the Lee Rowing Club. And so we've been doing quite a lot of work in this area. We started the I Belong project last year, so we'll be able to talk about some of that as well later. I'm joined this evening by Angela Wesley, who's our head of insights at British Rowing, and so she's going to take us through the data that she's collected. We are also joined by Liz Benke, who is an independent director on the British Rowing board, and she heads up the equality, diversity and inclusion side of things for the board. And last but not least, we have Lauren Rolls, who's our double Olympic Paralympic champion, and who's an excellent champion for inclusion in sport. So we'll get to hear lots from her as well. We are unfortunately not able to be joined by our by Jackie Trainer, who is our lead on EDI at British Rowing. She can't be here this week, but she has plenty to say, so I'm sure you'll hear from her in the future on this. Before we get going, there's just a bit of admin to go through. On the GoToWebinar platform on the right-hand side, you will have a questions tab. So if you've got any questions, head over to that. You'll be able to ping them to us, and hopefully at the end, we'll be able to go through some of your questions. And the webinar is being recorded, and we'll put it on the website tomorrow, so you'll be able to catch up and share it with any friends who can join us this evening. So I think we should get started. First question, we're going to go to Liz, and we're going to ask her why we're talking about D&I today and what we're actually talking about.
Thanks, Ash. So D&I, basically, how important is it that we make sure that we get everybody involved? Diversity inclusion is very much about empowering people and respecting and recognising what makes them different, because that's what actually creates the uniqueness of people as individuals. And we need to recognise that everybody is different. We all have differences, and we should celebrate that, and we should champion that, regardless of how old somebody is, what gender they are, what race they come from, what religion they believe in, what their sexuality is, what their disabilities are or aren't. We need to champion that, because that's what makes everybody special. And really, if you think about it, we want to get people involved in our sport, and the only way we're going to get people involved is by recognising that everybody is different and celebrating that. So to me, D&I is absolutely about getting people involved and getting people engaged, regardless of who they are. And why wouldn't we want to do that?
Cheers, Liz. Lauren, would you like to give us your comment on why inclusion in sport is important to you?
I think inclusion in sport is incredibly important, as for all the above reasons that Liz said, but in one way or another, we're all here on this webinar, and I guess we're all involved in rowing because we've had our lives impacted through it, and hopefully in a good way. And you know, sport in itself can change people's lives, and at the moment, you know, rowing isn't reaching those communities where we could be changing people's lives and showing them to the world of this sport and how incredible it is. I know as myself, as somebody that never did rowing until, you know, 7 years ago, I had no clue what the sport was and what it was all about, and I probably never would have got into it if I'd not had a disability. And because of that, I've succeeded because I've brought something to the table that is very different and a different way of thinking from a different background. And I think that for me is it's having that impact on other people. It's expanding our membership as British Rowing, but also as well, it's expanding the amount of people that we have in the sport to make it more competitive, and ultimately to have the sport move generationally with how things are going. We know we want the next generation to get involved in rowing, and if we aren't moving with the times a little bit and actually you know, expanding our mindsets and how we can become more not only diverse in the physical sense of race, religion, sexuality, and the numbers and the statistics, it's past that. It's the inclusion that's the most important part of that. It's people feeling like they belong and that their voices are heard, and that most importantly, that they can come to a club or they can come to a race and that they can participate equally, and really unlocking people's potential within that. We want to make sure people are performing to the highest level of what they can. And if you're not truly inclusive, then you're not going to be allowing people to compete at their absolute best and take part in this sport. So that's why it's really, really important that we get people involved and, we expand our mindset and our horizons within the sport, so that we're getting more diversity from a population point of view, and certainly in the UK we're being more reflective within the sport of what our population is, because we are a very diverse country. But also as well, then the inclusion side of it that needs potentially a little bit more work, and that's something that will take a little bit more time. But that is the most important two things within this, is because we want to just get more people's lives changed by this sport.
Absolutely, excellent. So before we get going and dive into the data, one for Angela and Liz, why did we come to do the research this year? Can we have some background before we get going?
Shall I start and let you pick up the data, Angela? Is that okay?
Sure. Sure.
Yeah. I think if you look at what rowing is, so I'm a non-rower. I've never sat in a boat. I've never picked up an oar. My whole perception, as are many people's perceptions out there in the world about rowing, is what we see in the Olympics, what we see in the boat race, what we see about Henley. And actually, the vast majority of clubs could not be further from those imageries. And we need to think about, actually, what is it that rowing is about? And we can't actually start to change perceptions until we understand what our sport is and how it's made up. And that's where this data is just so important, and why we needed to make sure that we got that information that allows us to take action in the way we want to take it. So I'm going to give Angela the detail of that, but if you take that as a principle, we need to challenge perception if we're going to make a change.
Yeah, thanks, Liz. And just to add to that, the Committee to Inclusion strategy that we launched very recently had in there, one of the key actions was to undertake a large piece of research to understand all of these things. So, where are we as a sport? How diverse are we as a sport? And how are we as a sport? So we wanted to do this to really understand that. So I'm going to kind of get on with talking through some of the data then. To start with, I should just say that this is very much a summary. As you can imagine, it's a very large piece of research, and there is a whole heap of data and a whole heap of research findings behind this. So today we don't have time to go through all of it, but we are happy to share whatever anyone would like to see going forwards. So I'm just going to touch on some of the key headlines to give you a feel for some of the things that were coming through. So in terms of diversity of the rowing community, so the work that we did, the survey that we did went out to about 1,300 members of the rowing community, and they're not all members of British Rowing. We spoke to members, we spoke to non-members, we spoke to all different aspects of the rowing community. I should add as well that we did actually put some research out to non-rowers as well, so that we can understand the perceptions of the sport from outside of the sport. So we had at least 500 people respond to a survey from outside of the sport as well. Alongside the survey, we did also do quite a few interviews. So I did, along with my team colleagues, we did 25 in-depth qualitative interviews to really understand some more about experiences within the sport. So that puts a little bit more meat on the bones of the data. So we've also got a lot of learnings from those interviews as well. Okay, so that's a bit of the background. So in terms of where we do well, and when we say where we do well, we mean in terms of comparison to the population. So where did we do well in terms of rowing community diversity? So probably no surprise to anybody. There is a great diversity of age in the rowing community. You know, you look at on who's on the boats, you can see people school age, all the way up to people in their 90s, and that could be indoor rowing, it could be on water rowing. There's not many sports where you can really be on the same team as your mum, your dad, maybe even your granddad, your grandma. So I mean, it's got a great diversity of age. In terms of gender balance, so we do pretty well in terms of the balance. So in terms of the sample and the survey, we had 51% male, 48% female, and we had 1% non-binary as well in our sample. And so that's a reasonably good balance, we would say. We also had 1.2% of the rowing community sample that from the trans community. And again, that seems fairly positive compared to what we know about the population. And then again, on a positive, so sexual orientation, 12% of the rowing community who answered the survey were non-heterosexual, so from the LGB community. And this is very much in line with the population. So a very recent study has come out, literally in the last couple of weeks, from Inclusive Employers, which suggests around 12 to 13% of the population from the LGBT community. So we're pretty much in line with that. In terms of where we don't do quite so well, and we do have some big gaps to fill. You can see here, so socioeconomic group, this is the biggest gap. So in the rowing community, we only have around 9 or 10% from lower socioeconomic groups. And this compares with around 47% of the population. So there is a lot of work to do. There's big opportunities here to really get rowing to a broader mix of society. And when it comes to ethnic diversity, there is only 6% of the rowing community from ethnically diverse communities. And this compares with around 14% of the population. So again, we're not representative. We have gaps to fill here to be better represented. When it comes to disability, long-term health conditions, there are 8% of the rowing community with a disability or a long-term health condition. And this compares with around 1 in 5 of the population. So again, we're not representative. And then education background as well. We asked on the survey what kind of school people attended, and we have a big over-index on attending independent schools. So in the population, roughly about 7% of people would have attended an independent school. In the rowing community, that is 27%. So we really over-index quite a lot there. And there's much more we can do to get to more state schools and really bring rowing to a broader mix of society. So those are kind of the numbers. We don't want to be too PowerPoint heavy today. So I haven't put loads of numbers in here, but we do have other slides we can share later with all the graphs so that you can see those. Do you want me to continue? Shall I keep going?
Yeah, thanks, Angela. I guess the next questions are, do you have key differences between the different groups in terms of diversity?
Yes, we absolutely do. So there are some groups, even though as a total rowing community, we mentioned that the gender balance is fairly good. In some parts of the rowing community, the gender balance very much skews to more males. So umpires would be a good example of this. Also coaches, to a certain extent, volunteers as well. And then even on age, we skew a little bit older with those 3 groups as well. Conversely, the younger members of the rowing community, generally speaking, demonstrate a bit more diversity. So it looks like there is more diversity coming through in the younger end of the sport, which is great to see. And what's important is that we keep those people, and you know, we make them feel welcome. We show them what a great sport it is, and they want to stay. And then hopefully they recruit more people to come through at the younger end too. So yes, there are differences. And the other one actually probably to point out is, you know, we spoke to members of the fixed seat community and the coastal community as well. And they show more diversity when it comes to their educational background and socioeconomic group. So that's another one to mention probably. I mean, there are quite a few, but those are the key ones, I would say. Okay.
Great.
I'll move on, shall I?
Yeah. I think the next bit we need to talk about is how inclusive and diverse do the community think they are at the moment?
Yeah. Okay, I'm trying to move it on. There we go. So yes, exactly. We asked the people on the survey that took the survey how diverse and inclusive they think rowing is as a sport overall, on a scale of 1 to 10, where 1 is not diverse, and that is in the dark blue, and 10 is very diverse. And then the same for inclusive. So inclusive is in the light blue. So you can see the most popular score for diversity was a 3 across the rowing community. But there are people that rated every single score. So there are people that think it's right at the far end as a 1, and there are people that think it's right at the other end as a 10. And similarly within inclusion as well. So inclusion, you can see the lighter blue, it's slightly flatter, so there isn't a particularly obvious kind of popular number, if you like. It ranges all the way again, but again, there's over 10% of people that are thinking that the sport is very inclusive generally. Okay, I'll keep going because we're talking about perception at the moment. So that's people's perceptions of the sport from within the rowing community. And like I said, we also spoke to people outside the rowing community as well. And these are just examples of some word clouds which highlights the most popular words. So the first thing we asked on the study is what 3 words would you associate with rowing? And the words that are jumping out the screen at you are the most popular words that were mentioned. So for people within the rowing community, they think it's fun, it's full of fitness, it's teamwork, it's team. So fun is a great word to associate with rowing, but unfortunately people outside of the sport don't see that. They see it being an elite sport. They associate it with the boat race, the Olympics, Henley, all those things that Liz was talking about earlier on. And this is a perception, and we know from within the sport that it isn't all about that, but this is the perception that people have from outside the sport. So there is definitely work to do to change perception. And obviously a lot of this comes from sort of what they see here in the media, but there's things that we need to look at as to how we can kind of show them, you know, the other side to the sport.
Great. And so yeah, move on to some of the challenges.
Yeah, so this next section really is kind of facing into some of the challenges that came out of the research. So you'll see a number of verbatims on the screen here. These are all taken from the research. These are words that people have said, and nothing's been changed. And I won't read these out to you. Obviously, you can read them yourselves, but this is just a selection, and it is quite hard hitting. You know, we are facing into some of this stuff. We need to face into it. And this is some of the things that people have experienced in the sport. So whether it be that, you know, they're being told to keep their head down because they don't want to make a fuss because they're worried about consequences, or, you know, they don't feel they can be themselves. We do have one in the bottom left-hand corner, which is probably sort of representative of maybe 5 to 10% within the sport who, from the verbatims that we've seen, are not necessarily believers that we should be doing diversity and inclusion. They don't see a need for it. they think everything is fine as it is. So, you know, it is worth, you know, mentioning that there are people within the rowing community that feel like that. Unfortunately, you know, they are there, but the majority do buy into it, and the majority really want to see change, and, you know, are really behind the diversity and inclusion agenda, which is great. But yeah, there's some quite uncomfortable reading there. And if I just keep going, I will kind of show you some of the themes that came out. Again, sort of looking at the challenges side of things, really. So I've touched on that first one around, you know, there are people there that think that everything is fine as it is. There are also verbatims coming through that suggest that, you know, we don't need to worry about diversity and inclusion because it's really all about performance and winning. However, sort of building on sort of a little bit about what Lauren was talking about earlier, if you can be yourself and you can be authentic, there is research that shows that there can be a 2% increase in performance. So if people feel included and they feel like they are their authentic selves and they can be happy with that and they can feel comfortable, then performance will rise as a result. So it doesn't have to be one or the other. The two go together hand in hand, and I think that's like quite a key message, really. I'll kind of keep going. So some of the people I spoke to, it was obvious, you know, that, you know, they just want to fit in, and if they don't feel that they fit in, that's when they feel uncomfortable. Everybody just wants to kind of rub along with everyone else and not stand out as being different. So how can we make people all feel equal, feel the same? You know, this is a really key point, that, you know, everyone should feel included. And not that they stand out. And quite often they may feel that they stand out is when they go to a regatta or they go to a big event. It might not be within their club, it might be on a bigger stage. That's when they notice it. I'll kind of rattle through these a little bit quicker. So D&I is not just about recruitment, it's about retention as well. There were some comments about people leaving the sport because of things they'd experienced. And a particularly key time is the end of a Learn to Row. That's when people really kind of make their decisions on whether they want to stay. And, you know, there are some clubs out there doing some great work around the end of the Learn to Row experience to really make people feel welcome and included and part of the club, and they then do want to stay and don't disappear. A big part of the inclusion agenda is around those that don't want to row necessarily as seriously as some others. So a key thing that's coming out of this is the real need for more kind of casual, social, recreational rowing, and whatever you want to call it, but for people who maybe can't commit to 6 or 7 days training, or people who have work commitments, family commitments, who might just want to go out on the boat once a fortnight. And then I touched on the sort of the lack of the support and fear of repercussions earlier, but, you know, we really need to make sure that when people do speak up about issues they're facing, that they feel supported and they get support, and they don't have to fear of any repercussions. A specific thing that came out was around lack of female coaches and female leaders in the sport, and this gets a special mention because you know, there is more being done around female coaches now, and it was great to see Louise Kingsley get the performance director role as well, because that is a fantastic role in the sport. It's a leader within the sport, and I think it's great that she's got that role. And you know, we want to see more of that, and we want to see more encouragement of female coaches, leaders coming through, because, you know, they offer different things to male coaches. It doesn't mean they're better or not, but they offer different things, and we should have that opportunity. I will stop in a minute. I've just got a couple more bits to say. Club culture is hugely variable, and you can have two clubs down the road from each other, one being incredibly inclusive and welcoming, and one maybe not quite so much. And that culture is set by those at the top in the club, whether it be the captains, whether it be the committees. And it's so important. Culture is so important, and I don't think that can be emphasised enough. So, you know, what we're seeing is some great cultures, but we're seeing maybe not so good ones as well. So we want to get everybody feeling, you know, welcome in all clubs. I touched on Henley and the boat race, maybe not helping perceptions, because that's what the public see, the non-rowers see. Those are kind of highlighting some of the imagery that isn't necessarily true for rowing, but those two particular events definitely do contribute. And then last but not least, we mustn't forget the rural communities and the coastal communities, because they've got some great stuff going on, and they've got some great inclusivity going on there. And we talk a lot about sort of urban environments and urban projects, but we mustn't forget the rural and the coastal areas as well. Okay, I'm going to keep quiet for a bit now.
Let me have a breather, Angela. I thought it's a good time to shoot a question over to Lauren. In what Angela's have taken us through, do you see anything that you can relate to in your experience of the sport?
Yeah, 100%. I mean, when the report came out, I remember it making me feel really emotional, and I think because it hit quite hard on me, because so much of the stuff that was, the quotes that were in there and the sort of figures really just have highlighted how much I've sort of kept quiet and buried my head in the sand a little bit, but how much I felt as though I related. And, as somebody that comes from very much a working class background, Birmingham girl, grew up not knowing anything about rowing, until I started rowing 7 years ago. And when I first joined the rowing team, I had a thick Brummie accent. I was this young 17-year-old girl that turned up for a first ever session in a Nike hoodie that was turnaround and didn't have a lycra, and no one understood what I was saying to them. I had such a thick accent, and I stuck out like a bit of a sore thumb. And I was definitely very aware of that, and in some senses got a lot of stick for that. And I really hid that part of me. And like Angela sort of reflected on, is the fact that for years, when I got into rowing, I stuck out so much that I hated that, and I just wanted to be part of the community and just fit in with people. So I just did, and just became a rower, and had no part of my personality showing other than that, and just committed everything to that. And because I didn't want to be the outcast in the group, and nobody, as natural as humans, we want to gravitate towards the pack, and we want to be part of that. But the more I realized that the impact that was having on my mental health, and actually that in not living authentically within myself, and actually being that training and just being confident with myself, how much that was having an impact on my performance and my mental health. And I decided to change things in my life, and I said that, I'm going to be myself. And actually that is, added to, I think in my eyes, it's more than 2%. Statistically we can show those things, but it's more than 2% to those people, because being able to be confident about yourself means you can go out on the water and you can perform better. It's not just about performance as well, it's about loving the sport and loving what you do. And if you don't turn up to an environment where you love something, you're not going to continue doing it. And that's kind of the point that I got to a few years ago within the sport. I was just thinking, I don't enjoy the environment here, I don't feel that included, I don't feel like I could be myself. And I didn't have the courage at that stage to speak out and say the things that I wanted to. And so I was going to leave at that stage. I was going to walk away from the sport. And actually it was my love for the sport and actually being on the water and the premise of what rowing is what brought me back to it, and has led my journey since, to go on win my first World Championships, European Championships, my second Paralympic gold medal. And through being confident in that nature has unlocked so many doors for myself. And my experience within rowing really highlighted, I guess, how much I'd suppressed who I was because of the environment that I was in, and most importantly because of the misconceptions around rowing. Whether it's when we go to the Paralympic Games, whether we go to any sort of competition, people have a preconception of what, and these stereotypes of what a rower is. And we don't, people actually don't talk to us because of it when we go and mix with multi-sport events, because they have this idea that we are these really arrogant individuals that have all come from private schools. And I think that misconception that they have about the sport is what is causing us to be in this situation that we are on an exterior. We were highlighting a little bit earlier about the key words that came out of both the membership and the non-membership, and it is stunning to see the fact that when you are involved in the sport and you are doing it, the main words that pop up are fun, how much you enjoy it, and all of these fantastic words. And then on the other side of it is, the Olympics. Not even the Paralympics were mentioned in that word chart there, and that shows how much of the diversity that we have and the inclusion that we have, and actually the good stuff that goes on in the sport. I'm not saying that the Olympics isn't good, but how much of it is overshadowed by Henley Royal Regatta, overshadowed by the boat race. And I do feel as though in Rome we have come to a bit of a stage where the unfortunately those bigger events or bigger parts of the community that have more influence, the bigger clubs, that don't have that want to increase their diversity, don't have that want to include people more, because they are functioning very well and fine on their own. And I think that they're overshadowing the parts that are great about this sport, because since I've been involved, since the report came out, I put my hand in the pot and I said, I want to be involved in this. I want to be involved in any way that I can help as an athlete. And I've had so many conversations and learned so much about this sport and what actually happens. My existence hasn't really had place outside of the performance team, mainly because I wasn't included at club level and I haven't been able to access clubs. So, I've been very lucky in the sense that I've always been included in the performance team. But since understanding, the community projects that we have going on, the incredible people that we have involved, it's really given me that hope for where, the future of this sport could go. And I hope that we continue to highlight that more, actually, and that we're working with the powers within the sport to work in the community and highlight what we're doing more, because it's not all bad. But unfortunately, I believe it's sort of the 10% that don't believe anything is wrong that are influencing it the most. And I think that we need to reach out to those people. And I have a very strong feeling that the people sat here on this webinar today are the people that want to make the change, and the people not sat on this webinar today are going to be the ones that we need to target.
Thanks, Lauren. Yeah, we have certainly lots more to shout about for sure. If we can go back to Angela. Angela, I think we got to the challenges that the data pulled out, but it must have pulled out some of the good work as well. Can we go through some of that?
Yeah, absolutely, Ash. And as Lauren said, there is a hell of a lot of great work going on in the sport, and a lot of it was mentioned through the survey and the interviews as well. So I've only got a selection here because obviously I can't fit every single one on the screen, but I can absolutely say that there is examples in every single region of great work going on in the world of diversity and inclusion in rowing. So, there's a selection on the screen here. There's examples of clubs starting to work with supporting refugees. The Lee have got their I Belong initiative, which I know you're very close to, Ash, and you may want to speak about that in a second. But, that is a great one, because I think the I Belong it says exactly what it is. People want to feel that they belong. They want to feel, part of the family. So I think that's a great one. And there's some other examples here from different clubs as well. And the World Class Start is doing some great work, and the Pathways team are doing some great work in terms of, the women's development program and, how they're recruiting coaches for that. There's so many examples. There's Gloucester are mentioned here, but there's so many clubs that could be mentioned, and we'll come on to other examples that you've seen as well. But yeah, I mean, I was really inspired by a lot of the verbatims that I read from the survey, because there is so much going on, but it's how we share that. I think that's the key thing, is people being aware that this work is going on, and who do they contact, how do they find out about it. So yeah, those are the key things to share probably from the research. But I'm sure like I say, you've probably got examples of other great work going on as well yourselves.
Yeah, maybe this is a good opportunity for me to just explain a little bit more about what the I Belong project is about, and then we can go to maybe Liz to talk about some of the stuff that she's had from around the rest of British rowing. So we after George Floyd's murder and the Black Lives Matter protest which happened in the summer of 2020, there was a group of us at the Lee Rowing Club who sat down and said, you know what, actually our club sat in East London in Hackney on the river, in incredibly diverse communities. We border Hackney, Waltham Forest and Haringey, and at minimum those boroughs, 50% of them of people are from ethnically diverse backgrounds. And our club, whilst being probably more diverse than most, certainly not representative of our communities. And so we decided, what, we need to do more to engage everyone who's walking past the boat club, those local people to come in through the doors and actually feel like they belong and actually stay. So that's how we decided to coin the project, the I Belong project, because that's, as you mentioned, Angela, that's really what we were going for. And so we've gone through about a year now of the project, and we had a really good, long, hard look at ourselves and say, actually, what are we doing now that isn't working and isn't allowing us to be reflective of our communities? So the first sort of phase we went through was actually working out what we wanted to do, and we decided we want to be more reflective of our local communities. And we decided actually just focus on the adult membership of the club, because our junior section, there's quite a lot of kids already, and actually they're much more diverse than the adult membership was at the time. So that's where our focus lied. And actually the junior membership have done something quite interesting at a similar time. Is they have started to use more positive action in the recruitment process for the junior squads. And actually the junior coaches were telling us the other day that 44% of their membership is from ethnically diverse groups, which is nearly closer to being in line with our local population. So that's pretty cool. But so yeah, the I Belong project, we did a lot of work just looking at what we were about, what we wanted to do. We wrote a strategy and a bit of an action plan, and we spoke to our members and the coaches and the board people, the managers of the club, and we were like, are you okay for us to do this? We want to do more in this area. And we were really, really pleased. Actually, we got really good support from everyone, the members, the coaches, and the management of the club. So that was really good. That was a good start. And then we had a look at how people come into the club and whether there was anything we need to do differently. And actually, on the adult side of things, for new people who haven't rowed before, we had one big Learn to Row course every summer. It would happen after Henley Regatta. We'd have a 6-week course. We'd have like 100 people, and everyone would be all hands on deck to help coach those people and sort of get them onto the novice program in September. And the problem with that is every single day, or definitely every weekend, people will bump into members of the rowing club when they're boating and they're coaching, and they will ask, oh, I really want to have a go at that. And if you decide in September you want to have a go at rowing, but there isn't a Learn to Row course until next July, that's a really long time to sit on a waiting list, and we had massive waiting lists. So we decided to change it up and start doing more regular, shorter, flexible courses, so that people didn't have to sign up to a really expensive long course. If they just wanted to have a go at it, and maybe 1 or 2 sessions is enough for them, they decide they're really happy to have had a go. And so we put on some more shorter, flexible Learn to Row courses, and that's been quite a big change actually for the club. And then we spent a lot of time meeting different community groups and inviting them to come rowing, and just speaking to different people and actually being proactive. The club's quite lucky in terms of actually the interest in joining the club and joining the Learn to Row courses is really, really high. But the problem is the people that really want to come through the door are not representative of our local communities. Actually, we have to do things a bit differently. And so we just spent a lot more time doing outreach. And some of the best stuff that we did this year was actually just putting up a tent when we have the Lee Regatta and speaking to people, handing out flyers, had an ergo. So we weren't doing ergo racing because we didn't want to be really elitist on the tow path. We were just talking to people. If people wanted to have a go on the rowing machine, we could teach them the basics. And actually, it worked really, really well. We met some really, really cool people who had walked past all the time but hadn't really understood what we were about, and we made the time to actually have the people there to talk to them and explain what we're about, what we're trying to do, and that worked really well. So we're definitely going to make sure that's a standing part of the club going forward. So yeah, that's a bit of what we've done, and actually it's the best stuff is just making sure you stand outside the door and talk to more people and actually have really easy, transparent ways to get into the club. So it's not rocket science, but it does take, you know, for an old school club like ours, maybe a bit of a step change to achieve. So yeah, hopefully you'll be able to hear a lot more from what we're doing going forwards. Liz, I don't want to just talk about the league because it is my club, so I probably shouldn't do that anymore. There's lots of other work going on, so could you maybe take on a bit of a tour around the country?
I can do my best, but you're absolutely right to be proud of what you're doing, because it does take people to make a difference to people. And I think that's what it is. It's about being brave to step in and go, do you know what? We need to actually work a little bit harder to get people involved. And that's whether that's the rowers themselves, the potential rowers, whether it's parents, whether it's helpers. It's about engaging people. And we've got some fantastic projects going on all over the country, both indoors, outdoors, on the coast, on the rivers. Rowing is so diverse, and people forget, because if you're not a rower, you have to remember the perception is this is 8 people sitting in a boat rowing like crazy for a very long time is what it seems like. You know, just think of what the boat race feels like to a complete non-rower. That's just an outrage. There's no way anybody's going to access that. But if we start to look at some of the stuff that's going on around the country, and I've tried to pick up some projects from all over the place. So we've got the London Otters, who are doing some fantastic work around the LGBTQ. Oh gosh, sorry, too many letters of the alphabet, and my apologies for getting that lot all wrong. But particularly around the trans community. We've got some great work going on up in Tees, up in the northeast, working with the university and also within the club itself, around getting people from different communities involved. And if you think about people, for example, from the Asian community who traditionally don't swim, you've got an additional barrier to the thought of coming rowing. And yet Tees Rowing Club and Teesside University at Freshers Week were looking at actually how do we encourage these groups to get involved. And they had a phenomenal number of people coming from the Asian community who were new students in, who wanted to learn to row. So actually it's about how do we deal with that in terms of swimming and allowing them to access the water. Tees have also done doing some interesting work around disenfranchised communities, rather than trying to get rid of the young people who are hanging around making a nuisance of themselves. They're actually looking at ways of how can we get this group engaged and involved in rowing to try and change behaviour. And I think that's a really positive way of taking something forward. Stratford Rowing Club around the disability community, and what I absolutely loved from their website was a statement which they said, we follow a basic principle. If there's a will, there is usually a way to get people rowing. Can we start to think about actually how can we do things rather than how, you know, what are the barriers that we can put in the way? And often the barrier is based on people's fear, because I'm going to have to do something differently. Well, actually, if you do something differently, doesn't it improve you as a coach? Doesn't it make your coaching better, more flexible, more creative, more attractive to a whole wide range of people? So let's start to think outside the box a little bit. Fairlock Rowing Club are doing some great work with the Muslim Sports Association around getting Muslim women involved in rowing. Just because you wear a hijab doesn't mean you can't row. And actually, you can wear clothing that is appropriate to your religion and still be, modest in all the rest of it. And we're engaging a whole new group of people who would never be seen on the water otherwise, unless we start to do some work around that. I think that Fulham Reach, need I say any more? Some of the work that they've done, linking in with the prison population, bringing people, offenders into the rowing community, and there's been some fantastic, amazing successes around that group. But I think it's not always about projects. It's about culture. It's about people. And we know that there are lots and lots of clubs who are doing some fantastic work, and they don't see it as something special. They see it as just part of their DNA. That's who we are. That's what we're about. And Trafford Rowing Club have done some really interesting work around changing their culture. And what they found is that they have shifted from being a male-dominated club to a club now that is 60% female. And that is about creating an environment where people feel welcome. Wouldn't you rather go to a place where people say, "Hi, how are you? How are you doing?" rather than looking at you in the way Lauren was almost describing, where she felt she didn't fit in. And I think I'm correct, Lauren, if I said you were mocked for not wearing lycra at one point. Well, what does it matter? You can row in a hoodie. You don't need to wear lycra. You can still row and still have fun. And I think it's really about how do we switch that culture. And somebody gave me an example, and I'm going to keep the club nameless because I think it would be unfair to identify them. But they've done some fantastic work in changing the culture around their club, and we're really seeing their club growing. And they had a new club captain, and they very quickly saw all that work being undone. And they had to step back in again and rebuild some of the work. And actually, they found they come out better the other side. They've got even more members now. But it is a constant change. It's a constant flux. It's a constant investment in people. It's not just, we need to do this and then it's done. It's not a tick box exercise. It's about moving with communities. It's about working with the community. It's about understanding those communities of what makes them tick. And in previous lives in different roles, I've done a lot of research around various different disenfranchised groups from sport. And it's very much about how do we actually change that perception. So the young lad who was unable to play football anymore because he'd lost his sight and was being told by his PE teachers to go for a walk. And actually, he found a sport that was willing to embrace him and bring him back in, to give him self-respect back. And that's all he needed, was to somebody to think outside the box and to re-engage him into something that he was passionate about doing, so that he could learn to live again and learn to be him again. And that's, to me, what this is all about. It's about changing that culture. And that's up to everybody within the clubs to make that cultural shift and make people feel welcome. It's not a threat, it's actually a real fantastic opportunity.
Thanks, Liz. I think we should keep going because we're actually getting through the time quite quickly. Lauren, I want to ask, what would you like to see us do more of in this space?
I think when it comes to particularly, I come from the Paralympic community and the adaptive community. I think, from my perspective, we have a real battle to just even get into competitions and to get into clubs, quite frankly. And, it's about participation and club, when we talk about events and stuff, they're like, we don't have enough participation. It's because, well, I can't even get into the club, let alone come and compete at it. So it's about, like Liz has talked about, it's about communicating with people. That's the basic premise of it all. If we communicated more with one another and figured out what needs we have, and people being open to that. One of our other rows on the team, Ben, he always talks about accessibility being a mindset, and I truly believe in that, because it's about, you know, when in the Paralympic rowing team, there's no barrier. There's no barrier to whatever we do, because our coaches who are both able-bodied and our whole team who is able-bodied, apart from the rowers themselves, you know, we have this kind of culture, as we've mentioned there before, but this attitude that whatever we need to do to get around the limitations that we have because of our disabilities, we just go around them, you know, and that we don't see things as an issue and go, well, we can't do that then, so, you know, we won't go here or won't go there, or, you know, we work through them, we come up with solutions, we problem solve around them. And, you know, that mindset was where I felt most included within the sport, because having those people around you that were able-bodied were like, yeah, sure, I'll help you out with this, or, you know, we'll get access to this, sure, it's no problem. You know, having those people that saw past the disability, saw past the limitations, for me was what was the most freeing part of the sport. And, you know, getting out on the water, it completely changed my life and freed me from the disability, got me out of my chair, and it completely made me accept my disability as well, in a very odd way. You know, I was an angry teenager when I first signed up at rowing, and now I've got to the point where I, you know, wouldn't change my disability for the world. But, you know, it's about getting to the point where, you know, particularly within the Paralympic community and in that adaptive region, we have people that want to do this sport, but they can't get into clubs because they're not accessible. And why they're not accessible? Because people don't bother to change them, because they think, oh, well, it's just one person. You don't realize the impact of actually, by you guys not being accessible in that club, or you having negative conversations or behaviors or predispositions about people with disabilities, and actually you just being a barrier to people, you don't realize the effect that has on that person. They go away and they think about it and they go, you know, I'm not included anywhere. I'm not included in sport. You don't realize the effect that has on that person with a disability, or anyone from a minority background. And I think if we start changing the attitudes and going, okay, well, what are your needs then? As somebody with a disability, like you should remove that prejudice that you have. And it's challenging. You know, we all have this unconscious bias, and we, as humans, we've developed it through what we have learned and been taught. But I think if you can see past that and challenge your own unconscious bias, and challenge that when you're having conversations with people, think to yourself, actually, should I just ask a question here? What are your needs? What do you need? What would help you here? If you ask those questions and have a conversation with somebody like myself would tell you, okay, well, I need a level access to the water. I need you to be able to help with my boat. I need you to help me get into the boat, sort of just hold the boat down a little bit. You know, I need to be able to move my wheelchair just off the side of the landing stage. The simple things make the biggest difference to people. And I think that that's where we need to start, is by just asking questions and not being scared.
Excellent. I think that's a brilliant segue, Lauren, into a question for Liz. British Rowing, how we're approaching this going forward.
We have a wonderful task to achieve here in terms of getting people engaged. And it is, you're absolutely right, Lauren, it is about understanding where people are coming from and not being afraid to ask. It's not offensive to ask somebody, what do they need? It's actually really, really about enabling. It's really about being inclusive by asking those questions, because it's fine to say, I don't know about your life, tell me, because I need to understand. And what we've, as a result of the Committed to Inclusion plan, we've now developed a diversity and inclusion action plan, which is starting to lay out some of the things that we could do to try and encourage rowing to become more diverse. And there's things around our advisory panel, who will be those go-to people to ask those questions. It is about making sure that we are using our role models, people like Lauren. I mean, what an amazing role model to be able to use, and to be able to talk honestly about some of their experiences. We need to make sure that we're looking at all forms of rowing. And I have to say, I keep banging this drum at the board meeting in terms of, it isn't just about sliding seat. It is about coastal rowing. It is about indoor rowing. It's about recreational rowing. It's about any form of rowing that you can think of that gets people involved in the sport. So we've got lots of work to do and this is through our regions, it's through our clubs. It's about looking at areas of deprivation. It's looking at areas where perhaps communities are more diverse, and putting stuff into that, like START and so on, to encourage things to grow. But it's also about education and training as well. And I don't want to ram that down people's throats. Inclusion and diversity training can actually be an awful lot of fun. It's not about saying what you can't do. It's actually about exploring what we can do and how we can move things forwards. And I would be remiss to not mention Love Rowing, because of, this is what this is all about. And I am very proudly wearing my Big Row hoodie, because this is part of what creates the funding to allow some of the projects that we're talking about to be funded. Sometimes they need a bit of pump priming to get them off the ground, and this is where Love Rowing is really, really important in creating that opportunity for people to have a bit of a play with something. If you've got an idea, have a play with it. Let's see how it can be worked up and developed into something that becomes tangible and really makes a difference to somebody's life, because somebody's life will be changed as a result of this. And who knows what that person will go on to do as a result of that investment that you make in them. And it is about investing in people. And I don't care whether you're sky blue, pink with purple spots. Everybody who wants to row should have a chance to experience it. And you never know, one day you might actually get me out on the water, but not yet. Not in December anyway, that's for sure.
I'm sure we can fix that. Thank you, Liz. We should definitely mention that if people aren't signed up to the Love Rowing newsletter, if you go to their website and get signed up, you'll find out about all the good work they're supporting, but also you'll be able to get notified of their next Big Row campaign, and help support them by either donating them some money or sharing it with your friends, and getting your clubs to back them, which is going to be really important for us to make a real difference. So we have got through the time quite quickly, guys. We do have lots of questions, but I think that we're going to have to follow those up offline, and we'll answer as many of them as we can tomorrow. The recording and the data is going to go on the website tomorrow, so please share that with your friends and go and have a good long dive. If anyone wants to get in contact with me and ask any questions, and we do want you to actually go and sit in your clubs and ask your friends, what do we need to do? Email me at clubsupport@britishrowing.org and ask us for help, or tell us what you need, because we need you guys to hold us to account so we can facilitate you to change in this space, because it's what happens in the clubs which is going to make the biggest difference here. So come and ask British Rowing for help. Liz, do you want to just round us up before we have to leave, sadly?
Yes, it's really frustrating that we can't get onto those questions, but we will give those questions absolute the attention that they deserve, because it's great that you're asking those questions and they will not be forgotten. So really, just to sort of wrap that up, I want to first off say thank you to all of you for coming along, and to Ash, Angela and Lauren for all your hard work on getting this up and running, and also not to forget the work that Jackie Trainer is doing, because although she's not here tonight, which is very unfortunate, but for very good reasons, and we'll look forward to having her back very, very soon. She's done an awful lot of work around this. But I think really we've just sort of highlighted some of the issues. This is what we've found, but we can't fix it. British Rowing are not the people who can make the absolute difference on the ground. This is you. This is your role. This is you as part of the rowing community to make that difference. And it is very much about you taking ownership of that. Because what we produce through Committed to Inclusion is a strategy for rowing, and that is delivered best in the clubs. So remember, this is about making people welcome. It's about recognizing and celebrating difference, whatever it is, and this is what makes everybody unique. I think that's probably pretty much all of it for tonight, except for to say thank you ever so much for coming along this evening. I hope that's been an interesting hour of your time. And really to say happy Christmas to you all. I know times are a bit tough at the moment, and I hope that people stay safe, because we need you back out doing what you love best, which is getting everybody involved in rowing. So thank you ever so much.
Excellent. Thanks so much for everyone joining us. And so it's been excellent to have such good attendance as well, such an important topic we have. Cheers, everybody.